I want to thank you for inviting me, and I think I owe a debt to Brother John back here for maybe recommending me to come and speak to you, and to talk about social justice in the form of workers' rights, and the idea that labor unions do have a place in the South, in the United States, and the struggles of workers historically and through the present. This talk began as I was studying the issue with the United Auto Workers at Volkswagen in Chattanooga, leading up to their vote in February. There was a lot of movement within progressive organizations to help support the workers at Volkswagen who were trying to form a union with the United Auto Workers, similar to what all of Volkswagen workers have across the world, with the exception of Mexico. What's called a works council, which is essentially a group of management and workers who come together to determine the means of production and the methods of production. Kind of what we see in the United States as a joint committee between labor and management working together to produce, in this case, automobiles. The works councils in the German model had their historical reference back to some of what we saw after World War II, and the coming together of workers and businesses and companies to produce, as we saw some of the greatest growth in the United States after World War II, and one that kind of had begun in its trajectory after the New Deal legislation was passed under FDR, that established and guaranteed workers the right to join and form a union under the National Labor Relations Act, which was passed in the mid-30s. I'm not a theologian. I don't think anybody in this room will claim to be one. I have spoke to the UU Church in Nashville before. Pastor Gail Seavey there is a great friend of mine. We serve on the board of Jobs with Justice in Nashville together. And I think what we try to do is to look at workers and the unions that they have formed as part of a continuing movement of social justice, and to do it in such a way that we can look at it and say, you know, the right to be in a union, to be a part of an organization of workers and folks who can support that organizing effort, particularly here in the South, I think gives us a great opportunity, but also a challenge here in the United States, and particularly in the South. I don't know if you chose this responsive reading specifically for today, but I think you'll see some of the common issues that we speak of as I talk more about unions now in the farm workers and those who go into the fields and harvest. It mentions firefighters in this context of those who put the fires out. But we understand that, you know, the idea that, you know, we are made to be used, and we are made to produce or to serve, whether our job is as a nurse or a firefighter, or we're in the concept of manufacturing, as most of the folks that I work with and the rank and file that pay dues, that pays my salary in production. You know, it says the United Steelworkers, but let me assure you that our union represents right now about 600,000 workers across the United States and Canada. And we don't just produce steel or are in the process of manufacturing steel. Just over the road from here at the casket factory in Manchester, we represent the folks there. We represent the folks who make the landing equipment here in Tullahoma. And so we have a broad and diverse set of workers who are members of the United Steelworkers. I belong to a union of bus drivers who drive students to school in Metro Davidson County in Nashville. So, someone said at a time that, our union represents folks from cradle to grave because we represent the folks at Forest Lawn Cemetery outside of Boston. And the perpetual work that they do there, because it's one of those cemeteries that they actually have a greenhouse and they put the flowers on the cemeteries for folks and actually plant live flowers, nothing plastic in that cemetery. And we also have folks that are in the medical services and nurses and nursing homes. We build Harley Davidsons in Wisconsin and in Kansas. So, as I said, it's quite diverse, and I appreciate the sister speaking of the written word and the books, because we produce a lot of paper in this country. Despite all of the imports from China and such, there is still value to something being put into paper and having something. So I'm one of those, I'll never have a Kindle projects, boycotting them. So we talk about the idea of labor unions, and I'm just always curious. In the classes that I teach in the education department for the United Steelworkers, everybody in my classroom belongs to the union. They wouldn't be in a class that is put on by the United Steelworkers if they didn't pay dues to the United Steelworkers, and usually are an officer or an activist within their local union. So how many people here have been or currently belong to a labor union? All right. Sister Barbara.
Yes.
What union did you belong to, or are you still?
Still an active member at National Education Association, retired teachers.
All right. NEA is one of the largest labor unions, although I think, unfortunately, some of the teachers who do belong don't consider themselves part of a labor movement.
Right.
And I was really kind of shocked to see that the TEA, Tennessee Education Association, endorsed a candidate in a district outside of Murfreesboro that has done everything he could to slaughter the rights of teachers. And I appreciate the comment about voting and early voting, so I won't stand too long on a political soapbox, but it is so important with early voting for us to consider those who actually do represent the interest of workers. And I think we all know who those are, although sometimes teachers get lost in the fog, like this morning. Other folks, I know, John, you raised your hand.
Teamsters Union.
All right. Drove a truck.
Yes.
Okay, and your wife?
No, I didn't.
But your family, you had some
my
history.
daddy.
And what was your
Ironworkers.
father?
Iron workers, steel workers.
Iron workers, or they're two different things.
Well, maybe it was one or the other, I don't remember.
Okay.
It's been a long time, but I guess it was steel workers.
Okay, so you grew up in a home that was provided for by a union job, Union job. Brother back here, you raised your hand. Yes.
IBEW
Okay, the electrical workers.
and CWA before that.
Okay, communication workers. Yes.
American Association of University Professors.
AAUP.
Yes.
Yes. And again, an association, but many of the members do see themselves as part of the labor movement, as activists, as part of a labor organization. Seeing the benefits that this membership provides that allows them to work together and brings them together for causes, sometimes in association with the universities, but oftentimes in contradiction to some of the policies of the university. And we'll see how that has really, the university professors, their activism has carried down to organization that we have now, the United Campus Workers, which is basically your staff and other employees of different universities. Others who raised their hand, yes, brother.
Let's see, Culinary Workers Union.
Yes.
International Brotherhood of Operating Engineers, NEA.
All right. So 3 unions that you belong to and provided you with the opportunities to provide for yourself and maybe family, carried you maybe around different parts of the country, especially maybe with the operating engineers, but also seeing that, we know that the opportunities of union membership have given workers the ability to rise above the standards of what we might see as a minimum wage. Because one of the roles that labor unions do, and the powers that they have under the federal laws, is to go in and to negotiate benefits and negotiate wages and conditions of work that are above the minimum, above the standard. And I talk about this in the context of the minimum wage. Our federal law has set a minimum wage. And there's a struggle currently underway to try to address raising the minimum wage. But very rarely, and I would say probably 99.9% of the time, individuals who belong to a union are paid higher than the minimum wage because we have strength in numbers and we're able to go in and to negotiate terms and conditions of work that rise our standards. So when we think about, the history and where we have come from. I go back and I look at mine workers in Alabama, just down the road from here. The northern parts of Alabama had great strength in the United Mine Workers of America and the opportunity for individuals to basically bring themselves out of issues of poverty because they were able to join a union. There's a book about mine workers in Alabama. It's called "We Were All Black Down There," and the idea that the mine workers were one of the first unions to confront the struggle of racism and segregation within labor unions, and the idea being that once we were all underground, there was no telling what color we really were. And the idea that we all struggled together against the companies and the big mine owners. We saw textile workers in areas of East Tennessee and in the South. The original textile worker unions were really up in the Northeast. And as the struggle continued and the battles for workers in the Northeast were carried down to the South, and we saw great opportunities for textile workers in areas such as East Tennessee and North Carolina and South Carolina to join and to form a union. We saw issues with regard to, the idea that, we saw these union representatives and folks coming into these areas where, the idea of a trade union was quite foreign. But once they talked to the workers and understood the conditions, they realized that unless we band together, unless we acted concertedly, we were not going to be able to challenge what our employers were trying to do. Moving up a little bit more modern in Memphis, the idea that Martin Luther King came and marched with the sanitation workers who were members of the American Federation of State, County, Municipal Employees Union in the city of Memphis, just struggling to have a decent wage, decent working conditions. And their slogan being, I am a man. I need to be treated as a human being, not something less. And Martin Luther King joined in that struggle in the 1960s. And as he returned to Memphis, that is where he was killed as part of that struggle. Now, this is a slide that I kind of use as just to kind of put us into perspective. There was a lot of talk during part of the Occupy movement and the issues of the inequality of workers and those who make, the 1%. And I think this slide kind of shows us historically where we've gone to the extent that after the passage of the National Labor Relations Act in 1935, you can see a dramatic increase in union membership because the federal law said you are protected to join a union. Prior to that, we had different parts of laws and different state laws and everything that kind of gave some indication to workers that they had the right to organize. But companies were still able to use antitrust laws to squelch the organizing of workers. So with the guarantee under the law in 1935, we saw union membership take a dramatic increase. Then the post-World War II, and when we had all of these service members coming back, going into manufacturing, you know, auto industries went from manufacturing automobiles to manufacturing tanks and other implements of war. But then when they came back from World War II, they went back into the manufacturing, and we had this big boom of workers. And again, union membership continued to rise. And then in 1949, we had a passage of a law called the Labor Management Relations Act, and under what was called Taft-Hartley, and that basically kind of squelched, again, the voice of workers because it attacked unions as being communists. And the idea that workers really should not have this opportunity, or that workers, as they tried to form unions, would engage in activities that were against commerce. So there was a kind of seen as, under the Republican administration, a way to try to balance that. And so we had a law passed, and union membership kind of went down for a little bit, but then it kind of bounced around a little bit. And then we go to the time of the 1960s. And you know, it's just taken a steady nosedive from then on. We had things like Reagan, who attacked the air traffic controllers and told them during their strike that they really had no right to return to return to work, and fired all of them. And you can see that, you know, all of these anti-worker, anti-union legislation, as well as those who have companies and figure out the ways to get around workers who want to form a union, the union membership has continued to decline. And so we've gone from a time when we had about 35 or over a third of the workers in the United States were members of unions, to now that we're down to about 10 to 11%. Much, much lower in the private sector, in the manufacturing sector, in the service sector, higher in the public sector. But again, we're teetering somewhere at this time around 10 to 11%. And I think more dramatically is the red line, which shows, you know, the income inequality. And as union membership was rising, we saw more of, you know, a balance between those who have and those who have not. And unions were able to kind of bring that income inequality to a point that everybody shared in prosperity. You know, we had a great sharing, and that continued along. But as union membership has declined over the last 40 years, income inequality has continued to go back up again. And we know that, you know, I think the takeaway from this graph is something that we say that, you know, union membership is what built the middle class. And it is what maintains equality among incomes and the shared prosperity. You know, it's labor that creates this wealth. But the wealthy do not return it to labor. Okay? And again, not being a theologian, but more of speaking from labor history and as a labor educator, there's a parable in the Bible, I think it's in Luke, that talks about Jesus talks to one. That's going to work. Jesus talks to one of the rich men and says, you know, you need to sell everything and get rid of everything. And he says, but I pay my workers well and I give to charity. And this parable talks more about the idea of charity. But I think Jesus might have been looking at it and saying more about, well, maybe we need to be more than charitable. We need to be more than charitable. We need to be conscious. We need to be conscious of what we do and how we treat people. And in this idea being the concept of let's think about how we treat workers and how we either as part of the labor movement or as consumers, can use our voice in supporting those rights of workers. So as I mentioned, we know that unions do make a difference in the workplace. They provide higher wages. Union members are more likely to have health benefits. And prior to the Affordable Care Act, where we had this great disparity amongst who had access to health insurance, therefore who had access to quality health care, that we knew that union members, through their benefits, through negotiations, have had access to health insurance. And that medical card, that health insurance card, for a long time in this country was what got you access to quality health care. And whether it was something that they paid for based upon the hours that they worked or negotiated a benefit, we saw, I think, the great opportunity of tying health insurance to your employment. And now as we look back, maybe that wasn't quite such a good idea, because as workers have moved and changed jobs and such, then we ended up with a substantial number of Americans who had no insurance because employers chose not to provide that benefit. And to be able to go out on the open market and buy health insurance personally was for most people almost unaffordable. Pension. You know, we had the Social Security Act that was passed early on as part of the New Deal and in that era. But we also see that, again, unions are able to go in and to negotiate a pension. So what we talk about in the world environment of Social Security, whether it is something that is provided for by government through contributions of employees and employers, or through negotiated benefits to the extent that employees, once they retire, they draw this pension. And I think my teacher is nodding her head and saying, yes, you know, I live on my pension now, but it is something that, you know, was offered to me. And, you know, I digress just a moment, and I know the bullying of public workers. I mean, we've seen this for the last 6 to 8 years, beginning all the way back to changes in right to work in Wisconsin and Ohio and Indiana and Michigan. But the pensions of public workers, you know, is something that, you know, they realized that they could maybe make more money in the private sector and as a university professor as well. But you choose to work in the university setting or in the schools because you know that you're giving something to the community, but you also have a guarantee of a pension. And that pension is what is going to provide for you as you grow older. You know, the union difference, I think, is actually being realized more in the South because we see Tennessee, Alabama, and Georgia had the highest growth in union membership in the year 2013. You know, a lot of people are scratching their head and thinking, you know, how can this be? But I think it's a matter of workers realizing that they worked at a place that there was a union. They didn't have to join the union, but for reasons personal or within their local union, they chose to now join that union. So we've had substantial increase in union membership in the South. There are a lot of challenges that we face. You know, we have multinational corporations, companies that, you know, treat their workers one way in one country and treat their workers in the United States a different way. You know, this keeps, because of this threat of unionism, this keeps corporations on their toes and always trying to find a way to keep unions out. You know, if corporations think unions are a bad thing, then we know they're a good thing. You know, it's kind of, you know, I wear my politics oftentimes, and it's probably no secret to folks that, you know, I'm a Democrat and a social Democrat, and probably would be a socialist if third parties had great opportunities in this country. But, you know, we think of, you know, if it's proposed by someone on the other side, then it can't be good for workers. And we see this union threat continuing to keep corporations on their toes. We've been challenged by immigration and immigrant workers. You know, we talk about in the reading this morning about those who harvest. You know, I think when we say our blessings of food, that we must always consider the folks who planted the food and not just prepared the food to bring it to us, but to also think of those who have harvested the food. And immigrant workers are some of those that are most often challenged in the United States because of their status. They're most likely to be working in unsafe working conditions, and they're very often the victims of wage theft, where employers don't pay them minimum wages or steal the wages that they are owed. Again, challenges by the conservative right, challenged by student loan debt. And we think about workers out there and their families and trying to put children through college and such, and the student loans. I spoke to a woman at early voting yesterday, and she just mentioned to me, we were both kind of sitting there waiting on our kids to vote, and my daughter's first time voting yesterday. And her son, not his first time, but she said what got him motivated to go to the polls and to vote was the concept and the idea of how much he was going to have to pay in debt, in interest, on the student loans that he was taking out. And in a society where we think education, is what brings folks out of poverty and sustains families, to strap students with such debt and interest. And again, we're also challenged by consumer rights and the idea that people have a choice when they spend money. They can go and they can buy a pair of tennis shoes that are made in China or someplace else, or they can buy a pair of New Balance tennis shoes that are made in the United States. We become a consumer group that is no longer conscious about labels. And we can go back to the boycotts of grape and pickles and all of these different things that, the products that we can purchase, and we gathered in and became a part of that movement. And no longer are we concerned about, how our food is produced, where it is produced, who picks it, and can we join in a project that seems to rise the level of standard and living for those folks when we choose to spend money. Just historically, you tell me when it's time to stop. I know.
It's real close.
Okay, so I'm thinking I got about 6 minutes. All right. So quickly, just to kind of go through and understand some of these challenges, because this is my concept of Dixie. And the first time I gave this presentation, I was actually in Havana, Cuba, and had to explain to the Cubanos and the others attending this conference what Dixie was. And the idea that these are right-to-work states, meaning that workers in these states do not have to be a member of a labor union in order to work where they do. And so, for example, in Tennessee, the brothers and sisters over here that are building the landing gear, most of them do belong to the union, and probably they have one of the higher rates here in Tennessee. But they don't have to, and that's what right-to-work says. You have the right to work for less, meaning you don't have to join the union. And so you can see that Dixie is kind of the basis of this right to work, but recently Indiana and Michigan have both gone right to work. And then we have this big swatch that goes from the Mexican border to the Canadian border of those states in the Midwest. And so it really is not just a matter of Dixie. Some of the constant struggles that we see currently, and this is where the now part of this is the Fight for 15, or the Show Me 15 campaign. And this is kind of feeds off of the minimum wage campaigns, where we're trying to address fast food workers and the ability of those workers to have better working conditions, have guaranteed hours, and the idea that, working in a fast food establishment or working in a restaurant as such is not necessarily a job that only high school kids have in order to make money for Friday night dates. It is a career for many people, or it is that step in their career coming from high school to a career where they're maybe working part-time and they're going to school, or they're going to trade schools or something. And many times we do see fast food workers as being the sole support of their family, and this is their job. And for somebody who's trying to support a family or support themselves while they're either in school or otherwise making less than $8 an hour, we as the community are subsidizing them. So, we have to be a part of and understanding why they are fighting to increase the minimum wage and why they are asking for anything from $10 to $15 an hour, something that would be a living wage in the areas in which they reside. We talk about, again, we've been in Nashville and we've been standing with these workers. I work for a union. I belong to 2 different unions, and I probably make pretty decent salary, coming from being a lawyer and providing those skills to the education department. But I also realize that there's a lot of folks out there that making less than $8 an hour is not a living wage. And we look at it and say that, if I as a union member, I could turn my back and say, oh, I'm in good shape, I don't have to worry about this. But I realize that, the road is very short for trade unions in the United States, and in the swoop of pens and legislation, it can end. There was proposals a couple years ago to basically eliminate the National Labor Relations Board, who monitors all of these union elections and such, defunding them. We see this constant struggle. Oops.
Oh, boy.
There we go. All right. So what is the new face of unionism as I conclude? We see 1 in 3 public sector workers do belong to a union versus private sector workers. They're typically going to be an educator, an office worker, or in food service. This is the new face of unionism because this is where the focus has been in organizing. Steel workers, we got a stronghold when it comes to making steel and paper and building Harley Davidsons and the other sectors that we work in, but we realize that there is this new worker and the idea to bring these workers up to a point. More women than men belong to unions, and as we survey, the majority of Americans are in approve of labor unions. A lot of them don't understand what they're about, and if they're given the option, they would much rather be in a union or at least have the benefits of the trade union and of the union in their workplace. For some other reasons, people choose not to join unions. Just in focusing on the South, there was a resolution that was passed by our umbrella organization, the AFL-CIO, to focus more importantly on organizing in the South. And we've seen that bear fruit at the United Auto Workers in forming their union down in Chattanooga. The UAWs also has formed a union outside of where's the University of Alabama. What city is it?
Huntsville.
No.
Birmingham.
No, the other city. Tuscaloosa. The Mercedes plant in Tuscaloosa. So, we know that there are great opportunities to join unions. And the South is, again, being a major player in this global economy because we have all of these transplant corporations that have gone to the South thinking, this is a really friendly place that we can go build our product and we don't have to worry about unions. So there's been this stronger effort, and again, Volkswagen in Chattanooga, the efforts of the United Auto Workers there. Unfortunately, we had a little interference by some of our elected officials to address the campaign. I love Clay Bennett. If you all get to see some of his cartoons from the Chattanooga paper, with our senator and our governor trying to keep these two apart, the efforts to try to attack the workers in Volkswagen, liking Chattanooga into what might become Detroit, and again using the Obama card to basically attack the auto workers union. But unions have new partnerships, and this is, I think, the positive side of this, as well as organizing. We've got this group called the Blue-Green Alliance, which is labor and environmental groups together. And then these local organizations like Workers' Dignity in Nashville, which is fighting against wage theft. The Fair Food Program, which is trying to help organize some of the grocery stores who purchase tomatoes from the areas of Immokalee, Florida, and rallying for wages and jobs for public sector workers, and again, the restaurant and fast food workers. So you have a lot of opportunity. There's challenges that we have But I think if you look out and you see that there's ability to organize campus workers and to fight for the rights of those who are trying to organize, we need to be a part of this movement. We need to be a part of this social justice and progress, because if we see unions go down, then it will take us all down with it. And I appreciate the opportunity again to speak. Hopefully this gives us some food for thought, and as we have food later, we can talk more about it, right? Thank you.